Hello and welcome back to my writing blog series. This is writing blog number 44. Even though it's quite a high number, I have recently started writing a new novel, and that is Nature's Culling. In the previous writing blog, it was all about writing chapter 1. For this video, I'm hoping to do 2 chapters. If all goes well, I should have time to write that, but if the writing is going sluggishly, or if I don't really know how to continue, then I might leave it at just writing chapter 2, but I hope to write chapter 2 and 3. According to my outline, this next chapter that I'm going to write, which is chapter 2, would be where the inciting incident happens, and according to the outline, it's when this group of people come knocking on Kenny and Penny's door. But I don't remember if I included anything about that in the previous writing vlog, but at least when I was done writing for the day and done filming, I think, I noticed or realized that I need to have something happen before then, because these strangers don't just come over and knock on the door because there's a virus in the city and they want to be away from that. So I need at least one more chapter before then. So what I'm thinking is that chapter 2 is going to follow up on what happened in the first chapter, and if all goes well in that chapter, I will also include this inciting incident that the virus breaks out. I imagine that Kenny and Penny watch the local news when they're at home chilling once their daily chores are done, and they see this on the news that a virus has broken out. Some of the first instances of the virus are in their hometown, and so it's very pressing for them to stay away from there, because it seems like that is the epicenter. I'm thinking that that is where it all starts. So it will be even harder for Kenny and Penny to stay away from the disease when it's where it starts. And when it's the first steps of a virus outbreak, I think it's harder to contain in the early stages, because you have to realize or know that there's a virus before you can try and do something about it, and before people are aware that they need to be at a safe distance from others, and they have to sanitize their hands, and they have to maybe wear a mask so they protect themselves and others. In connection with writing the previous writing vlog, I realized that I need to have this virus break out before the group of strangers come knocking on Kenny and Penny's door. And so I need to push that one chapter ahead. And so this group of people will come to Kenny and Penny's door in chapter 3 instead of chapter 2. So it will change things a bit. It will push them further away from where I am right now, but I think I need to have a bit more build up. This thing that concludes, or not concludes, but follows up on what happens in the first chapter, and I also need to build up to what's going to happen. Maybe they watch the news already. Chapter 2 is basically going to follow up on what happened in the previous chapter, and I need a bit more build up at the beginning of the story before the inciting incident. And I'm thinking that the end of chapter 2 has the inciting incident, that the virus breaks out, and that is the real inciting incident. And this fact that the group of people come knocking on Kenny and Penny's door is just a fallout of that, and so that isn't really the inciting incident but the virus outbreak. But I will get to work. Yes, one last thing, or 2 last things before I start writing. I forgot to mention what day it is. It is the 26th of March 2026, and the weather is very windy here today, and it might make a bit of a noise, and so I'm hoping that the mic on my phone doesn't pick up the sound of that. But yes, I'll get to work on the novel, and then I will get back to you. Hello again. It's about 3 hours later, and I have now written chapter 2. In total, for that chapter, I wrote 4,441 words. The chapter ended up quite long, and I think that maybe I included too much about Kenny's hurt leg. He's still struggling with walking, and his leg is hurting so badly that he cannot really walk, and so he struggles to put on clothes in the morning. I think that maybe I started the chapter too soon, because it starts when he's getting up in the morning. He needs to go to the toilet, but he never really gets to the toilet because he stumbles around in the dark and he can't really walk, and so he accidentally walks into the bed's leg and hurts his toe, one of his toes, and he curses under his breath, and he is annoyed. He's annoyed that he can't really walk, and he is also annoyed that he's hurting his foot in the dark. But then Penelope wakes up and she turns on the lamp and they talk, and she helps him put on clothes. He's struggling with getting his pants on because the pant leg is too tight and it hurts him, but he's still trying to pull on the pant leg. He shouldn't really be doing that. And Penelope sees that the leg is swollen, and so Kenny needs to call the doctor and get him to look at it. And as I said in the intro to this video, they have to get up and get dressed and be ready for the day's work, but Kenny can't really do that. They talked about it the day before as well. Maybe I should skip ahead. Maybe I should cut out the first part of the chapter where they're talking and he's struggling to get clothes on, and maybe I can just mention that she needed to find a different pair of pants for him because he couldn't put on the denim jeans because they're too tight. Maybe whittle that down and then focus on what's going to happen later on in the chapter. As I said, it's quite long, with 4,441 words. It's pretty long, and it's a lot longer than the very first chapter, and so I think that maybe I should start that chapter not sooner, later, so that we're getting to the meat of the action instead of having him or watching him trying to get ready for the day. I think it's clear to the reader that something is off and that he really needs to see the doctor. They live in a very remote area, and so they guess that he can't really go to the doctor, and so he needs to ask the doctor if he can come over to their farm and then look at his leg there. At the end of this chapter, I have all of them eat lunch together. A lot of things happen in this chapter because he wakes up early because he needs to pee, but he doesn't really get to use the bathroom. He gets dressed and then he goes into the living room. And then he sits there, turns on the TV, but starts reading a book that Penelope gets him. And then that was a way for me to incorporate into the story that he's a bookworm. He likes to read a lot, and he's rereading a book that he has read a lot of times before. I don't state that directly, but I mentioned something about Penelope knowing exactly which book it is when he mentions the title, and so it's quick for her to go and get that exact book. He's just going to sit there and read and try to do nothing. And then Penelope fixes breakfast. She makes breakfast even though it's something that Melody usually does. I don't know why Penelope can't make breakfast for them, but she does it in this chapter because it's unusual. She got up early because Kenny woke up early, and they decided that maybe they should just get to work because now that he can't really do anything, the others have to do the things he usually does. So they have more to do, but it's still in the fall, and so there isn't that much to do as in the spring and summertime. But there are still things you need to take care of at the farm or at the ranch. I don't know what difference there is between a farm and a ranch. I guess it's the same, but I'm not really sure. Maybe ranching is when you have cattle, and a farm is when you have crops. But I imagine that they have both. They eat breakfast together in the living room where Kenny is because he can't really walk around, and so he just sits in there and they eat breakfast together, and then they go out and do their things. They go out and do the chores they have to do, and then there's a time skip, and they come back into the house to have lunch, and he's still just sitting there reading a book. I don't know if he has managed to go to the toilet or not, but maybe I should mention somewhere that he had been to the toilet and then was trying to get back to bed when he stubbed his toe or something like that. I don't know. As I mentioned before, a lot of things happened in this chapter, and basically Kenny can't really do that much, and so Penelope gets stuff for him and he gets his food as well. And then when they're eating lunch together, I needed for them to go out and do stuff before they had lunch, because I needed one of the characters to go and get some important things before the virus breaks out or before they hear about it. So hopefully he's in the clear. But I needed Walt to go out and do the shopping that I had led up to in the previous chapter, and I wanted the others to get some work done before they go in and have their lunch together with Kenny. And then, because he has still got the TV on, then he hasn't really paid attention to what they've been saying on TV because he was busy reading, but he didn't turn off the TV, and so it's still on when the others come and they have lunch together. And then while they sit there and have a good time and they eat their lovely lunch, then this news is out that there's a virus. And I also mentioned that it started pretty close to where they live. And so they're at higher risk because it's in their neighborhood, so to speak, instead of a different country or something like that. But I had Walt get the things that they need so they can make do, at least for a few weeks. And then while they sit there having lunch and hear about this virus outbreak, then they talk about whether it was a good thing or not that he had just been into town and gotten these things. Hopefully he's in the clear, but now that he has just shopped, then it will be a while until they have to get groceries, or not groceries, but they have to shop again. And so one of them, I think it's Kenny, who mentions that maybe they should just have stuff delivered instead. And so the question might be whether they don't usually just do that, but maybe Walt had an errand in town now that he was out shopping anyway. Kenny is hurt, he can't walk. The others get some breakfast together, or they all get breakfast and they all have lunch and they get stuff done, but we don't really follow them. I'm mainly sticking around Kenny, and then when he's interrupted by the others who come back inside to have lunch, then he kind of looks up and, oh, okay, so already lunchtime. He was lost in the book. And so they talk about this, and Kenny reveals that he actually managed to get a hold of the doctor, and the doctor can come, but he's busy. There's a lot of other patients he needs to tend to, but when he's done for the day, he will swing by before he heads on home. And so indicate that there are a lot of sick people in the neighborhood or in that area where they live, and some may or may not have the virus already. And so these 4 people at the ranch risk that the doctor will bring the disease to them if he has already gotten infected. But I'm thinking that he hasn't been become infected yet. But Kenny needs to take care of his leg, and he needs the doctor to come look at it. They talked about whether he should go to the doctor instead, but he can't really do that, and so they need the doctor to come over to them. That is risky because then he comes inside the home, and then if he's got the sickness, the virus already, then he might infect the others. But Penelope says that she will make sure to disinfect things that he might touch while he's there. But yes, I have written this quite a long chapter today so far. I'm hoping to write chapter 3 today as well, but maybe I won't be able to record the section after that where I tell you about how it went and what I wrote. But I'm hoping to write the entire chapter 3 today, and then I will record the ending of this video either later today or tomorrow, I think. I'll continue working and then we'll see if I'm recording more today or whether it will be later, but let's get back to work. Hello again. It's about an hour and a half later and I have written chapter 3 now. It's the same day, but it's evening. I rarely get the chance to record late in the afternoon or early evening once my boyfriend has gotten home from work, but there was something he needed to do, so he's away for a bit, and so I could record this. Otherwise I would have had to record it tomorrow, but I'm glad that I can finish up this writing blog today instead of having to wait with recording the last bit. I have written chapter 3, as I said, and in total I wrote 2,770 words, so almost 2,800 words. The chapter is a bit longer than chapter 1, but a lot shorter than chapter 3. But as I said in the section between the first and the last part of this video, I might need to trim down some of chapter 2 to make it shorter and more concise, because I might have spent a bit too much time or too many words on Kenny and his injury, and so maybe I should move the story along and then get to what really matters, even though his injury is quite important as well. It ended up being important even though I hadn't planned on that, but I think in order for the story to work on a large scale, then I need to include smaller things like that to make it flow and to make it a bit more dramatic and to connect the dots, so to speak, because if I only wrote based on what I have in my outline, it would be very bare bones, and so I need to come up with additional ideas that I can put onto the ideas I have in my outline, if that makes sense. In chapter 3 that I have just written, my characters finally get to have their world shaken even more because, finally, it's in chapter 3 that this group of strangers come knocking on their door. It actually ended up not being them knocking on the door, but my main character Kenny is limping, or he's not limping because he needs to use crutches, but he uses crutches and he's going crazy if he just needs to stay inside the house all the time and can't move. And so he needs to get out and about. And so he and Penny make a deal that he can only go outside to open the gate for Walt when he comes riding and then close the gate after him again. Kenny just needs to do something to feel like he's productive. Otherwise he'll go crazy because he doesn't really feel like he's pulling his own weight. He's the boss of the ranch, even though it's their ranch, and he's calling the shots when it's about the animals and whatever is going on at the farm, but she is the boss of his health, and she just wants the best for him and wants him to take care of himself, and so he listens to her, and they make this deal that he can only go outside and then help with the gate and then come inside again. But meanwhile, when Kenny is outside helping with the gate, a car comes up the dirt road toward the ranch, and then this car is, I imagine that it kind of drives alongside the field that Walt is riding up toward the house as well. So the car is approaching and the horse is approaching. Walt comes riding and Kenny has to open the gate for him and close it again after him, so Walt can just ride straight into the stable and then do whatever he needs to do to get the saddle off the horse and to prepare for the night, I guess. But when Walt is done with the horse, he comes out to the gate where Kenny is just standing there watching the car, or he's looking at the car. And Kenny and Walt talk about this, whether it's someone they know, and they wait for it to either drive away again or for someone to get out. And Penny comes outside too because she has been watching Kenny from the window, making sure that he's all right. She wanted to come outside with him, But he said that no, I have to do this on my own, because if you come with me, then you might as well do it, and then it wouldn't make any sense. So he wants to go out there to help with the gate, and so he did that. But now they just stand there watching this car. But when Penny comes outside too, they start talking a bit more, and Walt is like, okay, what is happening? Who is this? And then he shouts to them, but nothing happens. And then he goes a bit closer. He goes out through the gate. He's like, who are you? And what do you want? And then a young woman comes out of the car. And it's her boyfriend and her siblings. So there are 4 people in this car, and they don't know the people living at the ranch, but they need help. At first I didn't really know what to write. In my outline I had just stated something like they come to the ranch to ask for help, but I hadn't specified what they need the help with, whether they want food or something. But it's still in the early phases of the virus outbreak. But Kenny, Penny, Melody and Walt haven't really been watching the news, and so they don't know how bad it is. I have stated in the novel that it's a young woman with an almost clean-shaven head, so her hair is very, very short, only a few millimeters or something. I wanted to write a specific word for what that hairstyle is called in English, but I couldn't find the right translation of it. In Danish, I would say karseklippet. So I use Google Translate. I should look it up. I have real dictionaries over there on my shelf, but I just Googled it and I couldn't find what the right term is, but maybe you know what it is called. But a hairdo where the hair is really, really short. Overall, it's like Sigourney Weaver's hairdo in Aliens, and other famous women have had this hairdo as well. But they almost have got no hair at all. But that was a side note. But yes, this young woman and her sister and brother and her boyfriend need help because her sister is wounded. She's bleeding a lot and they need bandages. And so Walt, Kenny and Penny discuss whether they can spare some. And then Kenny agrees with himself that, okay, yes, they can spare a medic kit because they have 2. But then after they have handed over this medic kit or thrown it to her, they talk about what they should do if someone else shows up and wants medical help, because now they only have 1 medic kit. It's the narrative voice, but I'm not really following any specific character. I try to be a close third, but without going into their heads and then stating how they feel and stuff like that. But I'm following them in turns, or I jump around between characters, but I'm hoping that I don't go too deep into their heads when I'm telling this story. But they talk about this and whether they need to get another medikit once they order stuff online for the next delivery. Walt is lucky that he didn't get this virus when he went into town, but that was the very, very early phases of the sickness. And even though the virus seems to have started there in that area where they live, it's still pretty likely that they won't get the sickness. But the more the virus spreads, the bigger the risk is. If you go into town, the more people will have it, and then your risk of getting the disease yourself is higher. But I also mentioned somewhere, maybe it's a bit of an info dump, but I mentioned somewhere that they were lucky that the doctor didn't have the disease either. And so Walt was lucky that he didn't get it, and he can't infect the others. And the others at the ranch haven't got this disease either, and the doctor was lucky. But because he's a doctor and sees many different patients, there's a big risk that he's going to meet someone who has got this virus and that he will get infected, and then he can't help anyone. Maybe I have hinted at this already, that the doctor has become sick himself, because this young woman who comes to ask for bandages says that the doctor can help them, and that they won't go to the hospital because it's chaos. So the town or the city that is close to where they live on this ranch is pretty chaotic to be in, and is a pretty clear sign that during the course of these few weeks that have passed since Kenny hurt his leg, the virus has run amok. So the chapter ends with my main characters and Walt. Maybe Walt is a bigger character than such. Maybe he could be a main character too, but I still consider Kenny and Penny to be the main characters. But they and Walt go back into the house and they agree that maybe it's a good idea to watch the news. They have avoided watching the news or listening to the news because it's nothing but bad news about this virus. And so it's bad, but as long as they're isolated on this ranch, then it doesn't really matter how bad it is out there, because they can just shut it out and then pretend everything is fine. Maybe that's a bit naive, and maybe that's not that kind, but I wanted this first meeting with these strangers that come to ask for help to be kind and generous. Maybe they could have been kinder, and maybe they could have been more generous and given these 4 people something else, but they gave them a bit more than what they asked for. And so I also want to reflect that the characters, my main characters, and Walt and Melody need to take care of themselves as well, because if they hand out everything they have, or if they give too much away to others, then they will struggle to survive or get by themselves. So there needs to be a balance. The story is already changing a bit uh, when comparing to the outline I have, but I don't think it matters that much at this stage, because I have included this about Kenny's injury, and now he's still recovering from it, but he has crutches and he can get around if he wants to. But that still means that he can't really do the things that he needs to do or that he normally does, and the others have to take over and do more things, so everything works fine at the ranch still. And I'm thinking that the injury means that when, it's not if, it's when these 4 people come back, that he can't really run to catch them, or he can't really escape if they try to catch him. I'm not sure what is going to happen, but I think that this injury is going to have some bigger significance than just him not being able to do the things he normally does. I looked a bit ahead in my outline, and before I started writing today, I still had this thing about the strangers that come knocking on Kenny and Penny's door as the outline for chapter 2, but I moved that to the next chapter because I had to include this thing about the virus breaking out. And so the chapter is about Kenny's injury and what they're going to do about that, but also this virus outbreak. And I also weaved in something about them not really watching TV at all because they don't have the time. And if or when they have the time to watch TV, they watch movies or something like that. It's not because they don't want to know what's going on in the world, but because it's just bad news, and then they might as well not hear about it anymore because it doesn't really change anything for them. Maybe it changes something for them now that people are going to come to them and ask for help. I actually thought that maybe someone else besides these 4 people are going to come to the ranch to get food or something like that. And then my main characters will need to be very adamant and very tough. It's tough love, but they have to make a stand and just be very clear about what they will and what they won't do to help others. I worried about this outline that everything is going to shift, but I'm not that worried after all because I have inserted an extra chapter, or the inciting incident had to be something else. And what I thought was going to be the inciting incident is just the fallout of that. Is this thing about the 4 strangers coming to their door. And so I figured that everything is going to shift a chapter, but I actually think it's not enough to stand on its own, and so I can just combine that with the next section in my outline. So the first part is that these strangers come knocking because there's a virus outbreak, but this thing about the virus breaking out, I included that in chapter 2 with the inciting incident. And so it's just this thing about the strangers coming to their door. And the next part of that, what I had in my outline for the next chapter, was that my main characters are very careful about who they help and who they let inside. They don't really let them inside the house, but because they're very careful already, and they want to stay at a distance. And that is also why Walt just throws the medikit to this young woman instead of going over and handing it to her. They have to be safe and stay at a safe distance. Because I didn't really have that much left for the chapter that I thought I was going to include that in, I will combine it with the next part. And that is going to be chapter 4 that I will write for the next writing blog. So I think this last part of the writing blog has gone on long enough. So in total, this video is probably going to be 30 minutes long, or maybe a bit less, or maybe a bit more than that. I don't know. I'll get to see that when I edit the video, but that's all for now. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you'll watch the next one. Until then, take care. Thank you for watching.